Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations. Today's podcast, Kristina and I are going to again explore how to raise boys. Now, I know you guys out there who pay attention to our podcast are wondering, didn't you just do that with Niobe Way, talk about boys? Didn't we?
We did. But, we've really had the pleasure of reading quite a few books recently on this topic. And given that in our law practice, while we represent male and female students, we tend to see and deal with cases with boys mostly.
Yeah. I mean, you have to wonder, especially in hazing cases, we represent fraternity members. We've never represented a sorority sister.
Not true. We have.
What? Don't forget that.
Oh, you did.
Oh my gosh, showing my age.
But you are correct in that 99.9% of the time, our hazing cases are male students.
Yeah, thanks for calling me out there. That's awesome. But why don't you introduce our speaker? That is your job.
Today we are joined by Michael Reichert, who is a psychologist who has worked in a variety of clinical, school, community, and research settings over the course of his career. He serves as the executive director of the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, a research collaborative at the University of Pennsylvania, and he is also a supervising psychologist at the Haverford School, which is outside of Philadelphia.
Very pretty area. Kristina and I were there.
Gorgeous area.
Gorgeous.
Many fine institutions in that area of the country. Michael has been published in many prominent periodicals, The Atlantic, New York Times, Washington Post, and today he's joining us to discuss his book entitled How to Raise a Boy, The Power of Connection to Build Good Men.
Welcome. So we're going to start with the first question, Michael. In How to Raise a Boy, you address society's narrow conception of what it means to be a real boy. We had Niobe Way, author of Deep Secrets, talk about how boys crave real friendships, which fade over time as boys hit their teenage years. Can you add anything else to that concept and maybe give us a fresh look about boys, maybe something we don't know about them, even though you guys are 50% of the population?
Good morning, Kristina. Good morning, Susan. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here and particularly glad to be following my good friend and colleague, Niobe. I was talking with Niobe recently, and we're getting ready to host a webinar. We began the conversation with each other talking about what has surprised us in our research, what led us to the positions that we're both in, respectively. And Niobe's study was about friendship, and what she discovered that surprised her was that boys indeed have tremendously intimate relationships with each other, relationships that they would die without, they feel. My research that wound up in a very similar destination came from a very different source. I investigated teaching and learning in schools around the world. And we began our large-scale survey, 18 countries, 1,500 boys ages 12 to 19, and about 1,000 of their teachers. And we asked a very simple question. We asked, what's worked? Trying to build a theory of boys' education inductively from the ground up. And what we found was completely unexpected, not mentioned at all by the teachers that we surveyed and interviewed, came exclusively from the boys themselves. And essentially what the boys said was, we depend upon a connection with our teacher or our coach in order to engage in learning. The vulnerable act of learning from somebody requires that we believe this person cares about us and wants to help us. Now, my research partner and I, we had 50 years at that point between us in the trenches of boys' education. We were unprepared for how powerfully boys described themselves as relational learners. And we realized that there was this fog of stereotype that kept us from seeing boys clearly, not just us, but folks in the trenches in some of the finest boys' schools around the world. we all had trouble naming this phenomenon that boys are relational fundamentally. Niobe found something similar. She found that we have this shroud of misconception that, what she calls false stories that keep us from recognizing how capable of intimacy boys are in their friendships. I arrived at a similar place looking at boys' relationships with their teachers and coaches.
That's interesting because this subject or this topic of relationships, Susan and I see it so often. At the beginning of the episode, Susan mentioned fraternities and hazing, of course, but there's a lot of positive that can come from fraternities and those relationships. And in your book, you talk about this idea of brotherhood being a distinct and integral facet in boyhood. And you discuss how it's ever present in institutions of boyhood like recess, sports teams, clubs, fraternities. When we represent young men in college Title IX cases, we do that work across the country. And typically our clients are accused male students. And so often, Susan and I have these really difficult conversations with our clients, these young men who are absolutely heartbroken and shocked when they not only receive the news that they're a respondent in a campus Title IX case, but they learn that they've been asked to leave or been kicked out of their fraternity, and their friends with whom they thought they had this deep connection, they're now on an island alone. What can you tell us about this, or what are your thoughts on why that happens?
Other than the legal aspect, because we always wonder, is it really the boys or the boys succumbing to pressure from their chapters saying, we don't want our charter revoked. You got to get that kid out and suspend him.
And it begs the question, how real are the friendships? And that's a painful, ugly dose of reality that these young men are navigating on top of everything else. So, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Are boys really good time Charlies?
Well, you're packing a lot into your question. So I think I need to unpack it a little bit or answer from different angles. Number one, boys' friendships are transformative, just as their relationships with teachers and coaches can be transformative. That's what Niobe Way's research established, was that these are relationships in which boys can live, they can breathe, they can be themselves. And absent those relationships, their mental health is considerably diminished. They're alone. So, the feeling that your clients have expressed when they get canceled by their fraternity of being at a complete loss, I think that's very real and painful. That's number one. But number two, we're in an era, almost a pendulum swing era, in which the realities of Title IX and Me Too are seeping into the culture in ways that I think are largely, there's been this culture, this bro culture that has existed in male development that has been tacitly a dominant theme for generations. And to be called out now historically about where aggression in intimate relationships crosses a line, I think that's actually really healthy and important. And it sets a bar that I think boys need to recognize and take account of. I think a lot about integrity and what enables a young man to retain his human integrity, his humanity, in the context of a culture that does so much, puts so much pressure on boys to lose themselves. This idea, for example, that for most boys, their introduction to their sexuality is in pornography. We're not really, some folks are talking about that, but it's not nearly a pervasive enough conversation, particularly in families raising boys. I think that the implementation of Title IX rules on campuses, I think that is, in my mind, a historic swing. Do boys, at the same time as they're being called out, need to be called in some restorative justice context? I do believe that. I feel strongly about that.
So do we. You should know that many, many years ago, Kristina and I went to Swarthmore, your neck of the woods, and we were certified in restorative justice. And, we talk about it for years.
It's a wonderful approach to conflict resolution, repairing harm.
But I will tell you, by and large, we don't get to employ those skills. We're typically hired to be advisors in a more traditional hearing setting, but we always pitch it. And I'm still waiting for the day where someone's going to ask us to serve as advisors in a restorative justice setting. Hasn't happened yet. When did we go to Swarthmore?
Oh, gosh. Years ago. I don't remember. But it's interesting to see academic institutions embrace restorative justice more for Title IX, of course, now that that's permitted with the regulations, or general student misconduct cases, but it has not caught on everywhere, and there's still many students who are very, very resistant to the idea and view it as a process that isn't going to help resolve whatever the harm in question is.
But we're not giving up on that, Michael. We believe in it too.
My son went to Swarthmore, by the way, and maybe during the time that you were taking your training, your certification.
You have to ask him, and did he see two fabulous women walk across campus?
Because I'm sure it was us.
I'm sure it was us.
The arc of history here is really important to acknowledge. That's really what I was trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I do look forward to a time. I believe there will be a time in which you will be asked less to defend young men in these accusations and more to help restore some kind of some resolution to it. I think I mentioned in my notes before your interview today that I'm launching a new study of younger men, 18 to 30 years old, in partnership with an organization based in DC, Equimundo. We're about to launch a State of American Men survey, probably within a month or two. We're very aware of the fact that we're undertaking this study in a context in which Senator Hawley is coming out with a new book, and Tucker Carlson is coming out with a new book, both about men and both about sort of celebrating traditional masculinity. The weaponization of masculinity is unfortunately one of the characteristics of our time. And your legal practice, my work as a developmental psychologist, a consulting psychologist, and a researcher, it's taking place in this historic context. What I will say, and one of the reasons we're focusing on 18 to 30-year-old guys, is I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a young man, to be raising a son or educating a son. I think it's actually the first time, I get grandiose here, Kristina and Susan, and I say, I think the first time in all of human history in which we're really able to acknowledge the full humanity of male beings, and in particular, the relational and emotional natures of males, I think is for the first time really coming under popular scrutiny. All of these athletes, for example, who are saying, indeed, I struggle with anxiety or depression or whatnot, the legitimation of males as people who have deep feelings in relationships, have intimacy needs, who have lots and lots of feelings and need to express those feelings. I think that's how I view this historic time. And we're in a contest for what view of men is going to prevail. We're going to have a kind of a militaristic masculinity, a throwback masculinity touted in the public square from some very loud voices. And I think that in your work defending young men who have been called out, fairly or unfairly, I'm sure, you get both.
We do get both. And we see that there is no one flavor of a male respondent. We've had many men tell us that they don't like hooking up. They want their relationships to be deeper than sex.
They don't like partying.
We've had that. We've had situations where there was rough sex and it was not introduced by the male. It was introduced by the female. So we do see a lot of young men cry.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
it's Michael, it's so interesting to hear you say that it's such a wonderful time to examine these issues and raise young men, because when Susan and I are meeting with young men every day and talking to their families, the constant refrain we hear from parents who are sitting in our office, in tears about whatever the situation at hand is because they're just in this nightmare that they never envisioned involving their child, is it's such a hard time for young men on college campuses in particular.
I'm going to throw a question that we've prepared our questions that occurred to me. And this is going to be a really controversial question. I am seeing almost the opposite, where it used to be that people would say that their boys need to toughen it up and the girls were allowed to be vulnerable. And lately, we're almost seeing a shift in parenting where parents of girls assume that the girls are competent and will take care of things, and that their boys are so fragile that if Kristina and I push hard, for example, when we do mock cross-examination to get students ready for a hearing, we hear their boys are going to break. And so we're actually seeing, wouldn't you agree, like eggshell males and warrior women?
I love that.
Yeah, you never know that. And that's actually what I love about what we do for a living is you never know what you're going to deal with on the day-to-day. Something new comes in, and just when you think you have a certain conception of how someone acts or responds to a situation, you're confronted with something new. But, I mean, what are your thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, because I'm going to tell you what. We're speaking, we get asked to speak at the darndest places, and Wednesday we've been invited into someone's home with a group of young men and their moms before they go off to college. It's coming up. Summer's almost over. And we're going to talk about things that they should be concerned about. Of course, we will give you credit, Michael, but can you give us a little something extra to share that we can talk to these boys and their moms about before these boys go off to college?
I'm still thinking about pondering your phrase, eggshell men and warrior women, Susan. I like that.
That was a good one.
Yeah. In a nutshell, what I would say is this. In a survey that launched the Boyhood Campaign, Global Boyhood Initiative, Equimundo did a survey and focus group research project. And when they surveyed parents of boys, what they found was that one of the values that parents cherished most importantly in their sons is something that they called emotional strength. And there's different ways of defining that I think really does illustrate my point that there's never been a better time to be a boy, to raise a son. Traditionally, emotional strength has been defined as stoicism. Suck it up. Don't show any feelings. Keep it to yourself. Rise above it. Be rational. The problem is that doesn't work particularly well. It comes at a tremendous personal cost that we've just hidden. We haven't really openly acknowledged. It's coming out now that football players and star basketball players and all kinds of public figures have been suffering and quietly believing that they need to somehow rise above that suffering. When in fact, the solution as a therapist, someone in clinical practice for a long, long time, what I know is that the solution to those kinds of struggles is the opposite of keeping it inside. It's letting it out, getting it off your chest, relieving yourself of the tension by finding someone that can, quote unquote, hold you, listen to you, care about you, understand. We're built to cleanse our minds of suffering and struggle, but not by keeping it inside. And what the current generations are doing, what younger men are figuring out, is that they need to be able to do that. They need the right, the permission to do that. I teach an emotional literacy course at that boys' school outside of Philadelphia, the Haverford School. I've been doing it now for close to 30 years. When we first started out, it was suspect, and only a kind of a self-selected few would find their way into the voluntary program. Now, in 2022, that program has become what the boys call the best program in the school. The room fills with people coming. And maybe they're coming for the pizza, but I believe they're also coming for the opportunity. And it's a drop in a bucket opportunity, but the opportunity to talk to their friends in a real way and the kinds of profound ways that boys will share stories about what's going on in their lives.
Your comments are making me think about, of course, we're located in Cleveland, Ohio, and so I'm thinking of the Cavaliers player, Kevin Love, who
That's
is
what I'm thinking of too.
huge,
Yeah.
and everyone loves him for a variety of reasons. But when he came out about his struggles, I believe it was depression and anxiety, he, number one, it was so brave of him to share and be vulnerable with the whole country and talk about that. And I think he drew a lot of attention to the issue, but it was also curious to hear people talk about, like, gee, how could this famous, rich superstar athlete have these issues? That's so shocking. And I know, Susan, I mean, I heard people making comments along those lines, and I thought, like, of course they do. I mean, this is what we see every day, is a certain, conception of masculinity. They're struggling and they have these issues and challenges.
Yeah, I just want to circle back, Michael, to our talks with moms and boys. Tell me if you agree with this. From what I'm hearing, we really need to say that we know the transition to college is going to be difficult. So for moms and parents of males going off to college where you are alone, and it's a long haul, that freshman year is hard, to make sure that there are outlets for those males to express homesickness and loneliness and fear. Is that the message you think we should send on Wednesday night and in future talks?
Yes, I would say it a bit differently. What I say to parents who are about to launch their sons to college freshman years, I say what you want is for your son to have you in his hip. If the attachment process in these primary relationships has gone well, so that the boy has a secure sense of being, quote unquote, well held by his mom or his dad or both, what we want is for that boy to have easy access to the resource of that relationship, no matter what he's facing. Now, the fear is always, we have this phenomenon that Kate Lombardi-Stone wrote about in her book, Mama's Boy Myth. We have this fear that many moms carry, that if they keep their sons too close, they'll somehow undermine his individuation, his masculinity. They'll turn him into a mama's boy. And what I say to moms when I talk to them, Susan, is that's nonsense. It's just the opposite. Boys will want to be autonomous and independent and strong, but we don't understand separation any longer in developmental psychology as turning away from relationships or giving up on them. We actually grow in relationships, not out of them. And so boys will use their mothers as sounding boards or as stress relief valves when they need to, provided that the channel for communication is kept clear. Now, a lot of moms do. They're the ones that initiate the calls. They can't deal with the separation at their end. That's a different phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation.
Well, I actually am reflecting because I have 2 girls and 1 boy. And ironically, I do speak to my son more than my 2 daughters combined.
That is true. You say that, it's very true.
Yeah.
Just as an outside observer.
Yeah. I'm thinking and reflecting. I was a single mother raising 3 kids. And I will say I always believed in my mind that it's much harder for a mother to raise a son without a dad present than it is a daughter. And there are a lot of single mothers out there. Do you have advice for single moms?
I have to refer you to a wonderful book written by a famous Ackerman Institute family therapist, Olga Silverstein. The book is titled The Courage to Raise Good Men. And it's a book that's based on her experience as a single mom raising her son. But essentially, Susan, what she says that I wholeheartedly agree with is you build this relationship with your son in which essentially you promise him that you will always be in the background of his life, there for him, supporting him, loving him, knowing him, willing to hold him when he need to reveal something. It's hard. And there's nothing about becoming a man that requires that your boy to turn away from that or give up on that or somehow go without that. strength comes from connection, not from separation. And that's the thing I think that we psychologists, folks like Niobe Way and myself, what we're trying to redefine is what is emotional strength. And it actually is having the courage to acknowledge, I'm scared, I feel bad, I'm upset, and acknowledge that in the face of a culture that might derogate you if you reveal those feelings. But that's the good news here. Less and less that's true. It's an exciting time.
Well, Michael, this has been a really wonderful episode. It's really such a pleasure to talk with you and hear what you have to add to the discussion that you put in your book, How to Raise a Boy, The Power of Connection to Build Good Men. We encourage our listeners to check out the book. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Michael, we could talk to you further, but I think it's really good to end on a note where my mind is just racing, because with all the pain going on in the world, leaving on a note that this is a great time to raise a boy. It's a great time to be a male in the face of everything, and that men are more comfortable being more emotional. That bodes well for both men and our
women.
daughters and women. So thank you.
Yeah. Good luck in your parenting. Thank you both. Nice talking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.